You're being ridiculous, Lillian. It's just another business trip. Bradley's voice barely registered above the crisp snap of his expensive leather briefcase closing. He didn't even glance up from his laptop screen. That dismissive tone, the one I had grown far too accustomed to, made my stomach clench. I forced a smile anyway. It was a reflex I had perfected over 8 years of marriage. My name is Lillian. I'm 35 years old, living what most people would consider a comfortable life in a sprawling Scottsdale, Arizona home. For 8 years, I had believed we were building something solid, something based on trust and shared goals. I now understand that I was the only one building. Bradley was just enjoying the shelter. He traveled frequently for his job as a regional sales director for Nexora Labs, sometimes 3, sometimes 4 days at a time. I never questioned it. His job provided us with the beautiful home, the 2 luxury cars, the financial security that allowed me to work as a freelance graphic designer without the crushing pressure of a corporate 9-to-5. But lately, something had felt different. A cold draft in a house with all the windows closed. Bradley had become more secretive with his phone, more defensive when I asked about his trips. When I had suggested joining him for this upcoming conference in Palm Springs, thinking it could be a small escape for us, his reaction was immediate and harsh. Absolutely not, he'd snapped. This isn't a vacation, Lillian. I'll be in meetings from morning until night. You'd just be bored out of your mind. His words stung. We used to travel together. He used to encourage me to come along. Now my presence felt like an inconvenience, a burden. Watching him pack now, I felt that familiar knot of unease tighten. He moved with a practiced efficiency, folding his best suits, packing his most expensive cologne, even including the gold watch I'd given him for his last birthday. For a work conference, he seemed awfully concerned with his appearance. That was the first little crack in the foundation. Which hotel did you say you were staying at again? I asked, my voice deliberately casual. The Desert Palms Resort, he replied, still not looking at me. His tone felt rehearsed. You know the one where they always hold the pharmaceutical conferences. I nodded, though the performance felt hollow. And you'll be back Friday evening, late Friday night probably. Don't wait up. He zipped his suitcase closed with more force than necessary. After he left, the silence in the house was heavier than usual. I tried to work, but my mind kept drifting. His careful attention to his appearance, the way he'd avoided my eyes. The rehearsed answer about the hotel, it was an accumulation of months of feeling like a stranger in my own marriage. So I found myself doing something I'd never done before. I started planning a surprise. The 3-hour drive through the desert gave me too much time to think. I rehearsed what I would say, imagining his surprised smile. You're crazy, he would say, but in that fond way he used to. But another part of my mind, a darker part, kept whispering other possibilities. The Desert Palms Resort was easy to find, a sprawling complex of low buildings surrounded by palm trees. The parking lot was full. It looked exactly as he'd described. For a moment, my anxiety eased. I walked to the front desk, my hands shaking slightly. A cheerful young woman smiled at me. How can I help you? I'm looking for my husband, I said, trying to sound casual. Bradley Morrison. He's here for the pharmaceutical conference. The woman typed something into her computer, her smile faltering into a slight frown. She looked up, her expression a mixture of politeness and confusion. I'm sorry, she said, but we don't have any pharmaceutical conferences scheduled this weekend. The receptionist's words hung in the air, clean and sterile and utterly devastating. For a moment, the polished lobby seemed to tilt. I clung to the marble countertop, my knuckles white. My mind raced, desperately searching for a rational explanation, a miscommunication, a last-minute change of venue, anything but the cold, ugly truth that was beginning to form in my gut. No conference, I managed, my voice a thready whisper. Are you sure, Nexora Labs? She checked her computer again, her expression softening with pity. No, ma'am, no corporate events at all this weekend. We do have a guest registered under that name, though, Bradley Morrison. Room 237. The blood rushed in my ears. No business event, just my husband staying alone in an expensive resort. Could you please call his room? I asked. I'd like to surprise him. Of course. She dialed the extension. After a few rings, she hung up. No answer, I'm afraid. "That's fine," I lied, forcing another smile that felt like cracking porcelain. "I'll just go up." The elevator ride to the second floor felt endless. Each ding of a passing floor sounded like a hammer blow against my composure. Room 237 was at the end of a long, quiet hallway. I stood outside the door for what felt like an eternity, my hand raised to knock but frozen in place. Part of me wanted to turn around, drive home, and pretend this never happened, but I had come too far. I knocked softly. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. Finally, on a desperate impulse, I tried the handle. It turned. The door swung open into a room that was clearly occupied, and a heavy floral perfume I'd never smelled before washed over me. It was not my perfume. Bradley's suitcase was open on the luggage rack, his clothes scattered with a carelessness that was entirely out of character for my meticulously neat husband. The bed was unmade, the sheets rumpled and chaotic. My legs felt weak as I stepped inside. On the nightstand, I saw it. A crumpled room service receipt. My hands trembled as I smoothed it out. The timestamp was from the night before. The order was for 3 dinners, 3 bottles of wine, and chocolate-covered strawberries. Dinner for 3. As I stood there holding that piece of paper, I heard it. The sound of running water from the bathroom stopped, and then voices, multiple voices. Female voices laughing and chatting with an easy intimacy that made my blood run cold. I should have left. I should have walked out of that room and driven away. But I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, listening to my marriage dissolve in real time. The bathroom door was just a few feet away. I moved quickly, silently, ducking behind the partially open door of the closet, my heart hammering against my ribs so loudly, I was certain they could hear it. The bathroom door opened. Bradley emerged, first wrapped in one of the hotel's thick white robes. He looked relaxed, satisfied in a way I hadn't seen in months. Behind him came 2 women. Both were probably in their mid-20s, both strikingly beautiful, both wearing matching robes that barely covered their thighs. They moved with a casual familiarity that spoke of routine. Same time next month, asked the brunette, her voice carrying the business-like tone of someone discussing a regular appointment. "Absolutely," Bradley replied, pulling out his wallet. "The 15th through the 17th. Just like always." The blonde laughed. "You know, Bradley, most of our regulars don't book us for entire weekends. You must really love your business trips." He chuckled, counting out several $100 bills. "What can I say? I believe in work-life balance." My hand flew to my mouth to stifle a sob. Regulars. This wasn't a mistake. This was a pattern. "Your wife still doesn't suspect anything?" the brunette asked, accepting the cash. Bradley's voice turned dismissive, the sound of it crawling over my skin like something unclean. "Lillian, she's completely clueless, too busy with her little art projects to pay attention to anything important. As long as I tell her it's for business, she believes whatever I say." Clueless. The word echoed in the suffocating darkness of the closet. He had reduced 8 years of my life, my support, my love into a single dismissive adjective. The pain was so sharp, so absolute, it felt physical like a blade twisting in my gut. I pressed my hand against my mouth, biting down on my knuckles to keep from making a sound. The time for tears was over. Something else was taking its place, something cold and hard and clear. The blonde started getting dressed, pulling on expensive lingerie. "That must be nice," she said, her voice light, having someone so trusting. "It has its advantages," Bradley agreed. "She handles all the domestic stuff, keeps the house running, never asks too many questions about my expenses. Perfect setup, really." I felt physically sick. The casual way he spoke of our marriage, not as a partnership, but as a convenience, a shell company for his real life. Speaking of expenses, the brunette said now, fully dressed in a designer outfit that probably cost more than my monthly income, "You're still running everything through your company, right? Same credit cards." Bradley nodded, and this was the moment everything shifted. Corporate card for all entertainment expenses, he confirmed. "My company has very generous policies about client relations." My blood turned to ice. It wasn't just his money. It was stolen money. He wasn't just cheating on me. He was committing fraud to pay for it. He was a criminal. They exchanged air kisses like old friends, and then the women were gone. I watched, barely breathing, as Bradley moved around the room. He gathered the scattered clothes, straightened the bed, and opened a window to air out the heavy perfume. He was methodical, efficient. He was erasing them. He was erasing what had happened here. He had done this exact routine countless times before. I remained hidden until I heard the shower start again. Then I moved. Quietly, I slipped out of the closet. My phone felt heavy in my hand. I started taking photos, the rumpled bed, the room service receipt still on the nightstand, the 2 champagne glasses on the dresser. I photographed everything, my movements, precise and steady. I was no longer a betrayed wife. I was an investigator building a case. Then I slipped out of the room, pulling the door quietly shut behind me. The 3-hour drive home from Palm Springs was different. The desert landscape blurred past, but I wasn't lost in thought. I was focused. The initial shock had burned away, leaving behind a cold, calculating anger. The devastation was still there, a hard knot in my chest, but it was crystallizing into something else entirely. Resolve. Bradley thought I was clueless, too trusting, too naive to figure out what he was really doing. He thought he could continue this charade, indefinitely stealing from his company, lying to me, and treating our marriage like a convenient facade. He was about to learn how wrong he was. I pulled into our driveway in Scottsdale just as the sun began to set. I walked through the front door of the house his crimes had paid for. I didn't go to our bedroom to cry. I walked straight to his home office. The time for tears was over. It was time to work. I closed the office door, the soft click echoing in the silent house. Bradley's workspace was just like him, meticulously organized with neat stacks of papers and folders, labeled with a precision that bordered on obsessive. His overconfidence, his absolute faith in my ignorance had made him careless. His computer wasn't even password protected. I started with the corporate credit card statements. The story they told was one I'd never imagined. Monthly charges at high-end hotels in cities across the Southwest, always for extended stays that coincided with his business trips. Restaurant bills for expensive dinners, always for multiple people. Charges at luxury spas, expensive boutiques, even jewelry stores, all neatly categorized as client entertainment. But it was the consulting service charges that made the picture crystal clear. Monthly payments ranging from $2,000 to $5,000 to companies with vague corporate-sounding names. Executive Wellness Solutions, Premier Client Services, Sunshine Hospitality Consultants. My hands were shaking as I added them up. Over the past 3 years, the total came to more than $85,000 in fraudulent expenses. This wasn't just adultery. This was felony embezzlement on a massive scale. His email revealed even more. Correspondence with escort agencies with coordinators named Jasmine, discussing services and prices like they were ordering from a catalog. One email chain stood out. Bradley was complaining that his company had started requiring more detailed justifications for his expenses. The coordinator had replied, "Don't worry. We can provide you with detailed consulting invoices that will pass any audit." They were actively helping him commit fraud. As I continued searching through his files, I found it. The thing that unraveled everything, a detailed budget spreadsheet. It showed exactly how much money he was stealing each month, and more importantly, how he was using it. He was padding his expense reports, skimming thousands of extra dollars each month that went into a separate bank account I had never known existed. The statements for that secret account showed a balance of over $40,000. But what truly shocked me was how he'd been using this slush fund. Beyond the escort services, there were payments to a gambling website, and then I saw the regular transfers, thousands of dollars each month to another woman's account, someone named Veronica, who lived in Las Vegas. I sat back in his desk chair, the leather cool against my skin, overwhelmed by the scope of his deception. This wasn't just about cheating or even corporate fraud. Bradley had been living an entirely separate life, funded by stolen money. And as I cross-referenced Veronica's name with a password-protected folder, I managed to open the final horrifying piece fell into place. Veronica wasn't just another girlfriend. She was his business partner. The folder contained encrypted communications detailing a side venture that involved selling confidential client information from Nexora Labs to competing pharmaceutical companies. Industrial espionnage. The man I had married wasn't just a cheater. He wasn't just a thief. He was a career criminal who had been using our marriage as a convenient cover story for his entire illegal enterprise. I was nothing more than a prop, the naive wife, whose presence made him appear stable and trustworthy while he sold his company's secrets to the highest bidder. The sheer weight of what I had discovered was suffocating. I was no longer dealing with an unfaithful husband. I was married to a sophisticated criminal. Confronting him would be pointless. He would lie, gaslight me, and destroy the evidence before I could do anything. I realized that if I was going to fight him, I couldn't do it alone. I needed professionals. I needed an army. I spent the next 2 days in a blur of encrypted searches and confidential calls looking for a divorce attorney. I wasn't looking for a mediator. I was looking for a warrior. I found her in Catherine Brennan, a name that came up repeatedly in articles about high-stakes divorces involving financial fraud. Her reputation was for being ruthless in protecting her clients. She was exactly what I needed. I walked into her downtown Phoenix office not as a victim, but as a client with a case. I didn't cry. I didn't recount the story of my heartbreak. I simply placed a hard drive and a single, perfectly organized binder on her polished mahogany desk. She listened intently as I laid out the facts, her expression shifting from professional interest to a kind of focused satisfaction. She clicked through the files on the drive, her eyes scanning spreadsheets and email chains. "This is one of the most comprehensive, self-documented fraud cases I've ever seen," she said, finally leaning back in her chair. "Your husband isn't just cheating Lillian. He's committed multiple felonies that could result in serious prison time." "What about me?" I asked, voicing the fear that had been a constant hum in the back of my mind. "We filed joint tax returns. Could I be charged as an accomplice?" Catherine shook her head, a sharp, definitive motion. "Not if we handle this correctly. The key is to report the fraud before the authorities discover it on their own. We demonstrate your full cooperation and prove you were genuinely unaware. You become the key witness, not a co-conspirator." Then she leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with strategic fire. "Here's what we're going to do," she said, and for the next hour she outlined a plan that was both brilliant and brutal. We would not make a move until we had every piece in place. We would wait for his next trip. Then we would strike simultaneously on 3 fronts. First, we file for divorce, citing adultery and criminal fraud, along with an emergency motion to freeze all assets, she explained, ticking the points off on her fingers. Second, you deliver your evidence to his employer. They will terminate him immediately and launch their own internal investigation. Third, we hand this entire beautifully packaged case over to the FBI. The timing is crucial. He needs to be completely blindsided out of town with no access to his files. By the time he realizes what's happening, his career will be over, his assets will be frozen, and criminal charges will be pending. The goal, she concluded, a thin smile on her lips, is to leave him with no options and no allies. She suggested one final piece. We should hire a private investigator, a third party to verify your findings and gather fresh evidence of his ongoing crimes. It will make our case airtight. I left Catherine's office feeling a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in years. The path forward was no longer a fog of pain and confusion. It was a perfectly designed blueprint for destruction. My army was assembled. The battle plan was drawn. Now all I had to do was wait for the perfect moment to declare war. The next 3 weeks were the most challenging acting job of my life. I woke up each morning next to a man who disgusted me, smiled at his casual lies about work, and pretended to be the same naive woman he thought he'd married. All the while, my army was working in the shadows. Catherine was preparing the legal documents. David, the private investigator, was tracking Bradley's digital and physical footprints. The moment came on a Tuesday morning. "I've got to fly out to Vegas," Bradley announced over breakfast, not looking up from his phone. Regional Pharmaceutical Convention, just 2 nights. My heart gave a single hard thump. This was it. David's investigation had already confirmed what this trip really was, a meeting with Veronica to finalize the sale of another batch of confidential client data. "How long will you be gone?" I asked, my voice a perfect imitation of mild disinterest. "Should be back Wednesday evening," he replied. That gave me exactly 48 hours. The next morning, I watched him pack with the same careful attention to his appearance that had first aroused my suspicions. But now I saw it with cold clarity. He wasn't just meeting clients. He was maintaining relationships with criminal partners. "Be safe," I told him as he loaded his suitcase into his car. I meant it in a way he couldn't possibly understand. I wanted him safe and sound until I could destroy him properly. The moment his car disappeared around the corner, I picked up my phone. The waiting was over. It was time to execute. My first call was to Catherine. He's gone. It's time. My second was to David. He's on his way to Las Vegas now. We're tracking him. David's grim voice came through the line. He's scheduled to meet Veronica at 3 p.m. to sell another batch of stolen data. The price is $50,000. My final call was to Nexora Labs' corporate security department. The director, a woman named Patricia Valdez, had agreed to meet me that afternoon after I'd explained I had time-sensitive evidence of systematic embezzlement by a regional director. The meeting was surreal. I sat in a sterile corporate conference room, a single woman at a table built for 20, surrounded by grim-faced executives and security personnel. I methodically laid out the case I had built, connecting my hard drive to their large screen, walking them through the documents, the spreadsheets, the emails. Patricia and her team listened in, growing silent amazement. When I finished, the room was quiet for a long moment. This is one of the most comprehensive internal fraud cases we have ever seen. Patricia finally said, her voice tight with fury. She echoed Catherine's assessment almost word for word. We'll need to involve federal authorities immediately, especially given the industrial espionage component. She looked at me, her expression a mixture of shock and admiration. Then she picked up her office phone, her movements sharp and decisive. "This is Valdez," she said into the receiver. "I want you to freeze all of Bradley Morrison's corporate accounts and terminate his system access immediately. Then get me the lead agent at the FBI's white-collar crime division. Tell them it's urgent." Wednesday morning arrived with the crisp clarity of a perfect Arizona day. While Bradley was in Las Vegas, undoubtedly enjoying what he thought was another successful criminal venture, I was putting the finishing touches on his destruction. The federal agents arrived at our house at exactly 9 a.m., armed with search warrants. I let them in my hand, steady on the door. The lead agent, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Sarah Chen, gave me a brief professional nod. "Mrs. Morrison, thank you for your cooperation. Your evidence has been invaluable." Watching them systematically search Bradley's office, bagging documents and seizing hard drives felt like a vindication for every time I had been dismissed, for every lie I had been told. At noon, Catherine called. "It's done," she said, her voice crisp. "The divorce is filed. The court has issued a temporary order freezing all your joint assets, including the secret accounts. He's financially paralyzed." The final and most anticipated piece of the plan fell into place at exactly 4 p.m. My phone rang. It was Bradley. His voice was confused and laced with a panic I'd never heard before. "Lillian, something's wrong with my corporate cards," he said, skipping any greeting. "They're all being declined. I can't access my company email." I took a deep breath, savoring the moment I had spent weeks planning. "That's probably because Nexora Labs has suspended your accounts pending a fraud investigation," I said, my voice perfectly calm. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for a full 10 seconds. When he finally spoke, his voice was a choked whisper. "What? What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the $85,000 you've stolen from your employer over the past 3 years," I said evenly. "I'm talking about the escort services you've been billing as client entertainment. I'm talking about the confidential company information you've been selling to competitors with your partner, Veronica. Should I continue?" Another long silence, then an explosion of blustery anger. "You don't know what you're talking about. You don't understand how this business works." "I understand enough to know that you're a criminal," I replied, my voice as cold and hard as steel. "I also understand that federal agents are currently searching our house, that your employer has fired you, and that you're facing multiple felony charges that could send you to prison for decades." I heard his sharp intake of breath, the sound of the phone clattering against a hard surface. When he came back on the line, his voice was pleading. "Lillian, we need to talk. There are things you don't understand. Come to Las Vegas, we can work this out." "I've already worked it out," I told him. "I filed for divorce. I've reported your crimes to the authorities. There's nothing left to discuss." "You can't do this to me," his voice cracked with desperation. "I'm your husband. Everything I did for us. Everything you did was theft, I corrected him. And adultery and fraud and industrial espionage, you did it all for yourself while you treated me like a convenient fool." I could hear him crying now, pathetic, self-pitying sobs. It wasn't remorse. It was the terror of being caught. "The federal agents want to speak with you," I continued, my voice unwavering. "I suggest you get a good criminal defense attorney and turn yourself in before they issue a warrant for your arrest." "Lillian, please," he begged. "I love you. I made mistakes, but we can fix this. "You don't love me," I said with absolute certainty. "You love having a wife who was too trusting to question your lies. But that woman is gone, Bradley." My voice dropped each word, precise and final. She died in a hotel room in Palm Springs when she discovered what kind of man she had really married. I hung up the phone and immediately blocked his number, severing his last connection to the life he had so systematically destroyed. The next morning brought news that exceeded even my most optimistic expectations. Agent Chen called at 8 a.m. He was arrested at his Las Vegas hotel an hour ago, she informed me. He and his accomplice Veronica were attempting to flee the country with nearly $200,000 in cash. Your husband was planning to disappear. Thanks to you, he's now in federal custody, being held without bail. The image of Bradley in handcuffs, his carefully constructed facade finally stripped away, filled me with a profound satisfaction. For years, he had treated me like I was too stupid to understand his sophisticated world. Now, the entire federal government was dismantling that world because of the evidence I had provided. The calls from friends and neighbors started soon after. The woman who had been dismissed as naive was suddenly being praised for her courage. But the most gratifying call came from Patricia Valdez at Nexora Labs. The company's investigation had revealed Bradley had stolen closer to $300,000 over 5 years. As a thank you for preventing far greater losses, they were offering me a substantial reward. But it was the letter from Bradley forwarded through my attorney a few weeks later from his federal detention facility that showed me the truth. It was filled with rage. He accused me of humiliating him, of profiting from his destruction. Even facing decades in prison, he still saw himself as the victim. He had learned nothing. I, on the other hand, was learning every day. The publicity from a feature article in the Phoenix Business Journal titled "The Wife Who Brought Down a Criminal Empire" led to new high-profile clients for my design business. It also led to an unexpected job offer. Patricia Valdez contacted me about a position in Nexora's corporate security department working on fraud prevention. The irony of being hired by the company my husband had stolen from was too perfect to resist. I accepted. 6 months later, I sat in a federal courthouse and watched my former husband, dressed in prison orange, plead guilty to multiple felony charges. Judge Patricia Whitman looked down at him from the bench. Mr. Morrison's crimes showed a callous disregard not only for his employer, but for the welfare of his own wife, who he exposed to serious legal consequences, she said, her voice echoing in the silent courtroom. The sentence came down a month later, between 15 and 25 years in federal prison. He was ordered to pay full restitution. He was left with nothing. Last month, I stood on a stage at a national corporate security conference in Denver. I was the keynote speaker. My presentation was titled, "When the Threat Comes from Within, How Personal Relationships Enable Corporate Fraud." Standing there explaining to an audience of 300 security professionals how I had methodically uncovered and documented a sophisticated criminal enterprise, I felt a sense of accomplishment that had nothing to do with revenge. Bradley had spent years convincing me that I was intellectually inferior. But in bringing down his empire, I had proven otherwise, not just to him, but to myself. During the conference, I met a security consultant from Seattle named David. He was intelligent, ethical, and treated my expertise with a respect I had never known. For the first time in years, I found myself in a conversation with a man who saw my intelligence as an asset, not a threat. Looking toward my future, my new career, new relationships built on honesty, a new understanding of my own strength, I realized that exposing Bradley's crimes hadn't just been about justice. It had been about reclaiming my own identity. He had made the fatal mistake of underestimating the woman sleeping next to him. And I had proven that sometimes the most devastating response to betrayal is simply refusing to remain the person someone else tried to make you become.